Well, good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alexis Conley, and I am the Assistant Director of Alumni Relations here at Bridgewater State University. I'm thrilled to welcome you all to our May Aluminar, Alzheimer's Disease, the Effects of Symptoms on Everyday Functioning with Dr. Sandra Neargarder. It's a beautiful sunny day out today, so I hope everybody's enjoying the day, and I hope we get to keep more sun coming in our future and warm weather. And before we get things started, I just wanted to give a few quick housekeeping items to enhance your viewing. First of all, the Aluminar will be recorded for future use. As such, it will be available on our website for future watching. Our goal is to have that posted within the next week or so. I would like to call your attention to the top right corner of your screen where you will find the view option. We suggest the speaker view for optimal viewing of this presentation. We kindly ask all participants to please have their video off and sound muted as to not take away from the presenter. Immediately following the presentation, there will be a question and answer period. Questions can be typed in at any time throughout the talk using the chat feature in the middle of your bottom toolbar. These questions will be compiled by our moderator and asked at the end. If the question and answer period runs longer than you are able to remain online, we will continue until all questions are answered and you will be able to watch the responses in the recording. Most of all, we want you to have a great experience and learn something new from Dr. Neargarder. Of course, I couldn't do this without my fabulous alumni co-host and moderator, Dr. Robert Bradley. So let me tell you a bit more about him. Rob Bradley is research manager at the Deloitte Center for Financial Services, specializing in banking and capital markets research. Prior to joining Deloitte, Rob led research teams at State Street, primarily focused on investor behavior, macroeconomic analysis, and asset allocation, as well as operations and business analytics. He was a founding member of the BSU employee network at State Street. He is also a faculty member at Boston College, where he teaches graduate courses on predictive analytics, communication, and leadership. Rob earned his bachelor's degree in economics from Bridgewater State in 2012, as well as a master's in applied economics class of 14 and a PhD in applied economics class of 2020 from Northeastern University. Rob lives in Plymouth with his wife and 3 sons. Take it away, Dr. Rob.
Thank you, Alexis. It is so good to be back with another Aluminar. We got to get back to doing these once a month. I miss doing this more frequently. It's really good to see the group of people that have joined today. I see a lot of new faces, so thank you for joining. And we have a really great talk today. I think we're going to all learn a ton. So without further ado, let me introduce our speaker today. Dr. Sandra Neargarder is a professor of psychology at Bridgewater State University, where she has taught since 1999. She graduated with a BS in honors in psychology from Wright State University in Ohio in 1991, and she received her PhD from Vanderbilt University in 1997. Following graduation, she served a 2-year term as a postdoctoral research fellow at Boston University and has continued her involvement there as a research scientist in the Vision and Cognition Laboratory, mentoring both graduate and undergraduate students on a variety of research projects. Moreover, she served a 6.5-year term as the director of the honors program at Bridgewater State University and a 9-year term as the chairperson of the psychology department. Professor Neargarder has published extensively in research examining Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and mitochondrial disorders. She has investigated a variety of neuropsychological, cognitive, and vision abilities in these populations, examining how specific deficits relate to underlying brain pathology and how they affect everyday living. Her research has been published in a wide variety of peer-reviewed journals, including behavioral neuroscience, clinical nutrition, cognitive and behavioral neurology, cortex, neurology, neuropsychology, Parkinson's disease, perception, and vision research, to name a few. In 2008, she was the recipient of the Presidential Award for Distinguished Teaching, and in 2007 was the recipient of the Excellence in Teaching Award from the Education Honor Society, Kappa Delta Pi. She teaches a variety of courses to undergraduate students, including biopsychology, neuropsychology, statistics and research methods, and she has actively engaged students in her research endeavors. So we are clearly all in very capable hands today. And so without further ado, Sandy, please take it away.
All right. Thanks a lot, Rob. And thanks everybody for joining me today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a series of PowerPoint slides here that I'm going to use as I talk to you today about Alzheimer's disease. So let me go ahead and start with this one. So how we're going to start here is I'm going to go through a variety of topics on Alzheimer's disease. They include, first of all, defining dementia itself. Then we're going to talk a little bit about brain pathology. I'm going to go through some of the more common symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about everyday functioning. So hopefully there's information in here that you're currently not aware of. And I'm going to be very happy to answer any questions you have following the lecture. So with that, let's get started. So first of all, I want to let you know that Alzheimer's disease has been around since 1901. It was discovered by Alois Alzheimer's, and it's a progressive degenerative disease of the brain. Basically, brain cells are dying and they're not being replaced. Right now, it affects approximately 5.8 million Americans, but by the year 2050, this number could increase to 13.8 million. So that's quite a bit of people. It is what we call one form of dementia. Now, the definition of dementia is a loss of intellectual functions that interfere with a person's daily functioning. So what we know about dementia is that there are many, many causes of dementia. And Alzheimer's disease is just one of those causes. In fact, about 60 to 80% of all dementias are caused by Alzheimer's disease. Just to give you an idea of some of the other types of dementia, I do want to show you this slide. So on this slide here, I have listed some of the more common types of dementia, and they're divided into three categories. The first thing,
I don't mean to interrupt you, but we can't see your slides.
You can't see my slides? Oh, okay. I am glad that you said that. Let's try this again. Share screen. Let's see. Okay, hold on one second here. Let me bring this up. I'm glad you said something. All right, let's go back here. All right, let's try this. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes. All right. All right. Let's try
It's
this.
just not,
again.
you might want to just make it full screen so that,
I will.
there you go.
There we go. All right.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thanks. So sorry to interrupt.
No, that's good. Thank you for interrupting me. So basically, what I wanted to show you is this slide right here. So at the top, we have something called cortical dementias. And cortical dementias primarily affect the gray matter of the brain. So if you look at this picture up here at the top, this is a side view of the brain. And we're basically taking a slice out of the brain and we're turning it sideways. And what you can see here, it looks, I guess it looks kind of grayish. This is the gray matter of the brain. And this section in here is what we call the white matter. We know that the brain is made up of specialized cells called neurons. And so this is a picture of a neuron right here. The cell body of those neurons make up the gray matter of the brain. The axons of those neurons, which is shown here in gray, make up the white matter of the brain. Basically, what's happening is a message is received by the cell body of the neuron, and it travels down the length of the axon. And so if you look at the brain here itself, we know that the cell bodies are located here in the gray matter, and the axons, which are sending messages to other neurons in the brain, make up the white matter. So we know that some dementias are primarily affecting what we call the gray matter of the brain, or the cell bodies of the neurons. These include Alzheimer's disease and another type of dementia called frontotemporal dementia. But we also have dementias that primarily affect the white matter of the brain. And these types of dementias are Huntington's disease, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and even Parkinson's disease dementia. And finally, there are dementias that will affect both the gray matter and the white matter. These typically include Lewy body disease and vascular dementia, which basically is occurring due to strokes. So I just want to show you this slide to illustrate that there are many, many causes of dementia, and Alzheimer's is just one of those causes, and it's the most common cause. All right. Before I get into the symptoms, I do want to just briefly show you the neuropathology that's happening inside of the brain with Alzheimer's disease. So here is a slide where I'm showing brain pathology. And there are two hallmark features of this brain pathology. The first one is called amyloid plaques, and the second one is called neurofibrillary tangles, or NFTs. So amyloid plaques. Here what you see are abnormal deposits of a protein called amyloid, which appears outside of the neurons. So if you look at this picture that I have up here, here are 3 neurons in this box on the left, and this is of an individual who's aging normally. If you look at the box on the right, which is associated with Alzheimer's disease, you can see we still have the 3 neurons, but now you can see these odd looking, what are called amyloid plaques, that are positioning themselves in between the neurons. And what that's going to do is it's going to affect the neuron's ability to communicate with other neurons. So it's going to disrupt that communication process. And so you see that in Alzheimer's disease. The other thing you see are neurofibrillary tangles. And here, this is an accumulation of an abnormal twisted protein fragments that are occurring inside of the cell bodies. And the key component of these tangles is a protein known as tau. Tau normally supports and stabilizes nerve cells. But what happens is, for some reason, it changes in its shape. And what it does is it kind of looks like little red veins inside of these neurons. So you can see in this picture here on the right, you can see all of these sort of little red veins. Those are the tangles. What happens is they build up inside of the neuron. They cause the neuron to burst, and that causes the death of the neuron. As the neurons in the brain die, the individual will show more and more symptoms. Now, one interesting fact is that all of us will have some plaques and some tangles as we age. Everybody gets them. What distinguishes somebody, though, from someone with Alzheimer's disease is the number that they have. So when somebody is developing Alzheimer's, these plaques and tangles take over the brain. They replicate themselves very, very quickly. And it's usually upon autopsy, what happens is that you count the number of plaques and tangles to try to figure out whether somebody actually had Alzheimer's disease or not. And so this is the general type of pathology that you're going to see with Alzheimer's. This next slide shows you a cross section of the brain. So you can see on the left, that's a normally aging person. You can see the gray matter, you can see the white matter, you can see something here called, this is called the lateral ventricle in the brain. It actually produces and contains cerebral spinal fluid. And then you can see key areas of the brain that are involved with language, that are involved with memory. Now, look what happens when you look at the individual with Alzheimer's disease. You can see generalized shrinking of the brain. These, these sections of gray matter are supposed to be very tightly close together, but they're not. You see large gaps in here. That's showing you that the neurons that are there are dying. The same thing with the ventricle. You can see how much larger that ventricle is. It's because cells in the brain are dying and the individual is losing that particular part of their brain. Also, looking at the language areas and the memory areas, you can see that they have drastically shrunk. So this obviously is the major cause of a lot of the symptoms that we see in Alzheimer's patients. And so that's where I'm going to turn my attention to now. I want to talk to you about the symptoms, and I want to talk to you about how they relate to everyday functioning. So I'm going to put up a list of symptoms. And typically when people talk about symptoms, they generally divide them into three categories. What we call the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, the middle stages of Alzheimer's disease, and then the late stages. So let's first talk about the early stages. What are you going to see? Well, first, let me say that we all experience memory issues as we age. I do now, like, where did I put my keys? Or I might be telling somebody about a movie I saw and I'll forget the name of it, or I'll forget the name of an actor, or I'll forget, I'll walk into a room and be like, okay, now why did I come in here? Those types of things are normal. What's not normal is when you get somebody who repeats things over and over again. Usually it's a question. I'm going to give you an example. Back years ago, when I was working on my dissertation, I had to travel all over Massachusetts, and I would meet with individuals who had Alzheimer's disease, and I would give them a series of assessments that I had. Most of them were looking at visual perception, but some of them were also looking at cognition. I met with a man in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. He just recently retired from his job. His wife told me he had Alzheimer's disease, that he was in the very early stages. And so I met with him probably 2 or 3 hours, giving him a variety of assessments, and he did great. And I was thinking to myself, does this guy really have Alzheimer's disease? Because he seems like he's doing really well. And so we started walking to my car. I had all sorts of equipment in his house, and I had to carry it all to my car. So he was walking with me, and he looked at me and he said, when do you think you're going to know my results? And I said, I'm going to go home now. I'm going to, calculate the results. I'm going to send you, the information in the mail telling you how you did. And he's like, oh, all right, that's great. And so we walk another 10 feet, And he says, so when do you think you're going to have my results? And I said, oh, I repeated again. It's going to give it to him in the next, week or so. And then about 30 seconds later, he says, so when do you think you're going to have my results? And he continued to answer or ask me that specific question about 20 times. And so then I knew, I'm like, there it is. There's the Alzheimer's disease, because that's what you see. Somebody will repeatedly ask something over and over again. Usually the words are identical. The intonation of their voice is identical. And so that's very common. And you might also see people, their forgetfulness is, maybe they forgot that somebody in the family or a close friend had passed away. So it's usually something substantial where you might pause and be like, wow, that's kind of strange. A lot of times this forgetfulness is going to lead to confusion and disorientation. People might, someone might say, hey, I'm driving to the grocery store. And the next thing you know, they're not at the grocery store. In fact, they don't know where they are. They call you and say, I don't know where I am right now. And so losing their way is also a symptom. In the early stages, people tend to have depression. And surprisingly, this might be something you don't know, they have visual perception problems. I'm going to actually talk to you a little bit about this, specifically contrast perception. So the ability to tell an object from its surroundings. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that in just a minute. They also have problems with depth perception. So they might be have difficulty walking up and down stairs, for example. If the stairs are carpeted and everything is the same color, they might have trouble distinguishing one step from the other. So these are the early stages. The middle stages, you tend to see poor judgment, impulse control, and disinhibition. One thing with disinhibition, you might see a lot of that play out verbally. So it's almost like some people, it reminds me of little kids, 2-year-olds, who will say whatever is on their mind, whether or not it's socially appropriate. You're going to see that with Alzheimer's patients. People are just going to say whatever, they're not going to hold anything back. People who've never cursed at all in their lives, they might start cursing, right? So you're going to see some things that maybe you haven't seen before. You're also going to see some odd behaviors. Hoarding is one, which I'm going to tell you about, and inappropriate dress. So on a day like today, the Alzheimer's individual, they might put on 5 winter coats and walk outside, or maybe they don't wear anything and walk outside, right? So it's not really appropriate. Hoarding is an interesting one. One of the first hoarding stories I heard was back in graduate school at Vanderbilt. I was taking a class on neuropathology, and we had a guest speaker come in, and her husband was the dean of the medical school. And he started to develop Alzheimer's disease, and nobody really knew it. He was having problems at his job, but all of his administrative assistants were covering for him. So they were doing the work for him. So it didn't look like there was any sort of lag in his performance. And his wife said, I knew the moment that there was something seriously wrong with him. She said, we went to a buffet one night, and we walked through the buffet line. He was in front of me, walked through the line. I wasn't paying any attention to him. I was behind him getting my food, and he went down and sat at the table. She said, I sat right across from him, and I looked over at his plate. He had taken every serving spoon out of every dish and put it on his plate. So no food, just all of the serving spoons. And she said, that's when I knew there was something wrong with him. So that's an example of hoarding. What another example is people will collect objects and put them in drawers at home. It could be magnets, socks. I've heard of people doing it with cookies. And what they do is they hoard them. They put them in a drawer and then they accuse people of stealing from them. So they'll accuse family members, they'll accuse neighbors that, hey, you're stealing from me. I can't find my socks or I can't find my magnets, not realizing that they themselves are the ones that put the things in the drawer. So hoarding is really fascinating, but it is very common to see that as well. Individuals have problems with abstract thinking. So if you say to an Alzheimer's patient, what does it mean when we say the early bird gets the worm? Now we know that saying, right? And we know that abstractly, that saying means that, you know, the people who are go-getters, who are out there, you know, getting up early, getting work done, they're the ones who are going to benefit. Somebody with Alzheimer's disease can only view it in a concrete way. They'll say, well, you know, the bird that's there first is actually going to get the worm. So they cannot think in abstract terms. Many will also experience personality changes. I've had people say to me, I never liked my mother until she got dementia. They would tell me that during, you know, they never got along with their mother. They thought their mother was fairly mean. As soon as their mother got dementia, she got really, really nice. And so now they get along with her. So you can see these dramatic shifts in an individual's personality. You can also see somebody who was very nice, very laid back, become very mean, even violent as well. So you can see these shifts. Some people have delusions and hallucinations as well. You're going to see wandering behavior with certain individuals. And I see this on the news all the time. An individual left their house. They were last seen walking in the woods, or they were walking down the street. Nobody knows where they are. This is also common for people just to get up and leave their homes, and just, we're not really sure where they're walking to. Some people hypothesize that they're trying to find their earlier life. Maybe they're trying to walk back to a house that they remember from their childhood or from their 20s, but we really don't know. The other thing that you're going to see is people will fail to recognize familiar people, even close family members, could even be a spouse. So that's also common. And then finally, in the late stages, the person is pretty much bedridden. They're totally dependent on others for food. They usually become incontinent as well. Most people, to pass through all these stages, the average is 8 years. So once a person first starts showing symptoms, their average lifespan is going to be 8 years. But everybody's a little bit different in that as well. One thing I want to tell you about with these symptoms, I want to tell you a little bit about contrast, because that happens to be what most of my research has been on in regards to looking at Alzheimer's patients. So I'm going to show you this slide. And individuals with Alzheimer's disease have a deficit in contrast sensitivity. So this is defined as the smallest difference in intensity that a person can resolve between an object and its immediate surroundings. So first, I want you to look at the coffee and the coffee cups. The one at the top, you have black coffee in a black mug. That is an example of low contrast. On the bottom, black coffee in a white mug. That's a high contrast example. Look at the pills on the right. I mean, how many of us have dropped pills on the floor and then you're down there on your hands and knees trying to find them, especially if it's the same color as your floor, right? I mean, I end up turning my head sideways, looking for depth information to find that pill. A white pill on a white floor, you know, good luck finding that, right? That's a low contrast example. A white pill on a wooden floor, there's more contrast there. It's going to be easier for you to find it. Alzheimer's patients have a lot of difficulty with low contrast. They're not going to find that pill on the floor. And if they're pouring coffee into that black mug, most likely they're going to overpour it because they have trouble distinguishing the object from what's being put into the object since they're the same color. And so what we have done, some of the research that I've been involved in, there are tests that you can give people to measure contrast sensitivity. And I've worked with colleagues at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. And what they've done is they've taken the data that we've given them for our Alzheimer's patients, plugged it into an algorithm, and they were able to take a photograph, a normal photograph, and show us what that same photograph would look like to an Alzheimer's patient. So I want to show you those. So if you look on the left, that's a picture of a living room. The top is the actual photograph. What you see on the bottom is how it would look to somebody with Alzheimer's disease, taking into account their contrast deficits. So that's how they see that. If you look at the picture of the kitchen, the one on the left is the normal photograph. The one on the right is how it would appear to an Alzheimer's patient. Now imagine yourself walking around that living room and walking around that kitchen if you can't really see much, right? You're going to bump into things, you're going to drop things. It's very difficult when things are of low contrast. And so one thing that I'm just going to mention to you is you can enhance the contrast of the environment to help the patient get around better. So that's one of the things that we try to do. I want to briefly tell you about a study that I was involved in that relates to this contrast deficit. And this is a study about eating. So this is about nutrition. And this was a study that I did with some of my colleagues back in 2004. So this is a while ago now that we published this research project. And why did we look at this? Well, one of the individuals I work with was doing some research at the Bedford VA, and they have a unit for Alzheimer's patients. And they were complaining that their Alzheimer's patients on the unit weren't eating very much. It was really hard to get them to eat. And so we started thinking about that. You know, why aren't they eating? Is it a cognitive thing? You know, do they not physically feel well? But then my friend said, you know, do you know that a lot of the food they serve at these places is white? Like mashed potatoes, chicken breast. Most of it's white. It's pretty bland. There's not a lot of spices in it. And she said, everything they use there is white. It's a white tablecloth. It's a white plate, white cups. Everything is white. You walk into the bathrooms, everything's white. The floor's white. The toilet's white. The sink's white. The tub's white. Yeah, it makes it look clean, but people can't see anything, right? So we wondered, well, maybe they're not eating the food because they can't see it. So we designed a study where we went into this facility and we manipulated the color of the plates. So this is what we did. We went in both at lunchtime and at supper time. And what we did is we had 3 different conditions. We have our pre-intervention condition, which we call our baseline, where we wanted to measure how much are people eating when we used those white plates. And then we had an intervention condition where we switched out the white plates for the red plates, the bright red plates. And we wanted to see how much are people eating now? And then we went back to the white plates again in what we call a post-intervention condition. We went back to the white plates. How are they eating now? You know, the reason we went back to the white plates is it could be that, you know, because we're using red plates and they're new, it could be a novelty effect. Maybe they're eating more because things are a little different, they're newer. So we had to go back to the white plates to see if we get an effect of the red, that it disappears when we go back to the white. What we did is we measured their food intake. We measured the food on their scale based on weight in grams before they ate, and then we measured it again after they ate. And so that's what we did. And this is what we did for our data collection. For 10 days, we used white plates, we used white cups, because we also did something with liquid. During the intervention, that was 10 days. We used red plates and red cups. Post-intervention, we went back to the white plates and the white cups. We tried as much as possible that, you know, all of these 10-day periods coincided with a sort of pretty much a stable menu, right? Most of the food was white. There were no variations in staff during this 30-day period. Room setting was the same, lighting was the same, daily routine was the same, health of the patients was the same. So we tried to control as many environmental factors as possible when we looked at this. So what do you think we found? Well, when we went from the baseline, which is shown by the first gray bar at the bottom for lunch and supper, to the red plates or the intervention condition, overall, we found close to a 25% increase in food intake. They were eating more with the red plates. When we went back to the white plates, that dropped back down again. So what that's telling us is that our intervention actually worked. Patients were eating more when you used a bright red plate so that they could now see the food that was on their plates. But then that led us to another question. Does the plate need to be red? So we did a second experiment. This time, we started with white plates, and then we used a high contrast blue plate. Then we went back to the white, and then we went to what's called a low contrast red plate, like a pastel color. Then we went back to the white, and then we went with a low contrast blue color. So really a pastel blue. And then we went back to the white again. So the question is, what did we find? Well, food intake increased with the bright blue plate, just like it did with the bright red. But when you went to the pastel colors, it didn't. So what this tells us is that there needs to be a lot of contrast between the food and the plate in order for the person to see it. Now, you might be thinking, well, what if I were serving spaghetti with spaghetti sauce? You wouldn't use a red plate. In that case, you would use a white one. So that what really is happening here is there has to be contrast between the food and the plate itself to make it most visible to that particular individual. And so actually, when we published this study, there was a lot of nursing home facilities started using the different types of plateware, and they've had really good results with it. And what we know is that contrast sensitivity, it just doesn't affect nutrition. It affects a lot of things. It affects all of the things that I have listed here. Playing cards or bingo, reading, driving, mobility, recognizing objects, watching TV, eating, taking medication. It's embedded everywhere in our everyday lives, right? So one things we've learned, or one things that we have told people in terms of real world applications, specifically of contrast, is I have a few things listed here. So some of the general recommendations, first of all, keep the living environment simple and clutter-free. You don't want, knickknacks and all kinds of things blocking paths from the kitchen to the living room or anything like that. You need to keep things simple, and you need to keep it clutter-free. The individual will get around a lot easier if you do that. Enhance the lighting. Lighting will help to increase contrast between objects. Make sure it's evenly distributed in a room. Try to minimize any glare that might be there. And use contrast whenever possible. You can use contrast to enhance objects, but also to hide them or minimize them. I'm going to give you some examples here in the suggestions below. Think about the bathroom first. Everything's white in that bathroom. So one thing that will help is a non-skid bath mat that's a different color than the tub at the bottom, or even those decals people put on the bottom of the tub. Alzheimer's patients don't like to get into a bathtub, and many people think it's because they think it's a hole. They can't see the bottom of the tub. So make the bottom of the tub visible to them so they know that there's an ending to the tub itself. Different colored knobs for hot and cold water. The shower and tub rails should contrast with the tub color so that they can see them. Use colored toilet water in the toilet bowl. A lot of times, individuals with Alzheimer's disease, they might go in the bathroom and they might relieve themselves on the floor. They might do so in the tub. They don't know where the target is. It's because everything's white. So you need to make it stand out. This is the target. So you need to identify it somehow. Even putting a black mat or something around the toilet to distinguish it from the floor would be helpful. Now think about, for instance, in the kitchen, think about electrical outlets. If the outlet is white and it's against a white wall, the person is not going to see it. So if you don't want them to use the electrical outlets, they should be the same color as the wall. If you do want them to use the electrical outlets, you need to make it stand out. So a black electrical outlet against a white wall is an example. The same thing with handles on cabinets, right? If you have a set of white cabinets and you don't want the person to be opening the cabinets, paint the handle white so that they don't see it. But if you do want them to open the cabinets, make it a high contrast color. Same thing with buttons on appliances, right? Open shelving is a good idea. Glass cabinet doors will help them easily identify items. Other things that people have done to prevent wandering behavior, when people just leave out the front door. A lot of times if you put a black mat in front of the door, on the inside, Alzheimer's patients think it's a hole, and so they won't step on it. Other people have wallpapered their doors with wallpaper that looks like a bookshelf, like a library, and so the person doesn't think it's a door. So you can use contrast to hide things, but you could also use them to accentuate things so that they can find them. So you can use this contrast in a variety of different ways. Other types of recommendations that go beyond the contrast, but just in general, based on some of the symptoms that I've told you. The patient should engage in exercise. There's more and more research coming out showing that exercise that work on balance, aerobic capacity, and strength training do help with the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. Another thing that's really important is to maintain social connections. You know, having friends stop by, having family stop by are very important. If they're having a lot of memory difficulties, which they will, having written reminders for them, you could even use a big calendar, like a big desktop calendar. Verbal reminders are helpful. Labeling cupboards in the kitchen or drawers. You can label them with words, but as the disease progresses, you will need to use pictures instead, because they might not understand the words anymore. Leave familiar items, pictures, blankets, where a person can easily find them. Play music or watch TV shows or movies from earlier days. So one thing you might not know is memory loss with Alzheimer's follows a temporal gradient. So if a person is 80 when they get Alzheimer's, the memories that will be first to go are 79, 78, 77, 76. It's going to go backwards in time. And a lot of times people end up living and telling stories from their earlier days, when they were in their 20s, when they were in their 30s. So that's the music they want to listen to. Those are the TV shows and the movies they want to watch because they remember them. It comforts them. So you need to think of their memory loss in that way. Try to minimize distractions. If you have the TV on and you're trying to talk to the person at the same time, and at the same time, maybe there's music playing, that's going to be too much distraction for the individual. You want to try to keep it very basic. Break tasks into smaller steps. It will help build confidence. So if you have a patient who wants to make cookies, for example, take the recipe and break it into very small steps. First of all, we need to get a bowl out of the cupboard. Next, we need to measure a cup of flour and put it in the bowl. So breaking it down step by step is going to help them feel really good and build some confidence. And be patient. The person has no control over their behaviors or things that they say. No control. Their brain is changing and they can't control it at all. So those are some sort of general recommendations when it comes to working or living with someone who has Alzheimer's disease. And finally, the last slide I want to show you is what can you do to decrease your risk of getting Alzheimer's disease? Well, what the research is showing is you need to keep yourself healthy. So avoid or control high blood pressure, high cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, obesity, smoking, alcohol consumption are all things that increase your risk of getting Alzheimer's disease as you age. Exercise is the #1 thing you can do to help create new neurons in your brain and new connections. It doesn't, you don't need to be, go out running every day or anything like that, but going for walks, doing some yoga, doing some stretching, all of these things, strength training are going to reduce your risks. Maybe making healthy food choices most of the time. I mean, I'm not the type of person that says, hey, I don't think you should ever eat this again. It's everything in moderation, right? Maintain strong social connections. That's a big one as well. Form healthy sleep habits and stay mentally active. Cognitively challenge yourself and learn new things. My students ask me this all the time. They'll say, my grandma does Sudoku or a crossword puzzle every morning to try to keep her mentally active. And I tell them, I said, that's good, but the best way to form new connections in your brain is to do something you've never done before. Start up painting, play an instrument you've never played before, pick up a sport or some other activity that you don't know how to do, because that's the best thing you can do to keep yourself mentally active, is to do things that you haven't done before. So all of these things are ways to decrease your own risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. All right, well, I am going to stop there and I'm going to hand it back over to Rob.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. Informative in terms of just like the science and the way that the disease works, and also just as the way it actually progresses and things you can do. I mean, just absolutely, I learned an incredible amount over the last hour, so thank you. So for everybody here, if you have a question, feel free to just type it in the chat and I will read it to Dr. Neargarder on your behalf, and we'll get the answers. Maureen said, best lecture I've heard in years. Fascinating. I agree, Maureen. I have a question. So in terms of diagnosis, is there a test of some sort? You mentioned like the amyloid plaques and NFTs. Is there like some threshold amount there? Can we even look at those while you're live? You mentioned that those are usually
for the longest time we could not. So basically the way the diagnosis would work is somebody would go to their primary care physician and they would rule out a variety of other possibilities for the memory loss, including looking at a person's side effects of medications, looking to whether they had depression, ruling out other issues through blood work, even brain scans. And then what happens is the person would get diagnosed with probable Alzheimer's disease. And so usually the confirmation is not until autopsy. But one thing that we have now is we have PET scans that are available, where basically you could administer through a dye, right, that's injected into the individual. You could administer a dye that's targeting amyloid and tau, and that you can see it in the scans. And so doctors would be able to see it and say, hey, it looks like, there's more here than what is normal, that this person could be developing dementia of Alzheimer's disease. So we do have ways to do that. Those PET scans right now, it's a 75 to 90% probability of matching what's found on autopsy. So it's not 100%, but it's pretty high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it's tricky because there's probably different thresholds for different people and things like that, right?
Exactly. There's not like a specific number per se. Yeah.
Gotcha. So Bob asked, does early onset progress faster than a later diagnosis?
So early onset, so there are genes that play a role in Alzheimer's disease. So early onset, I'm thinking of somebody who gets it in their 40s and 50s. Most people get Alzheimer's at the age of 65 and older, and that's considered sort of the late onset Alzheimer's disease. The late and the early involve different genes. And so, but usually the early onset, so in some cases, it does progress a bit faster. But if somebody, there are people though that might get Alzheimer's where they're 90 and then it progresses very fast as well. So it might depend on the individual and their health at the time for
Right.
that.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's a good question, Bob. And then Maureen asks, what's the relationship between Alzheimer's and sleep apnea, if any? Does it contribute to the progression, sleep apnea?
It doesn't contribute to the progression, but we do find that sleep disorders are actually can be risk factors for a wide variety of brain disorders. Even Parkinson's disease, they have a lot of sleep issues. And the reason we think that is the pathology associated with these diseases. We find that a lot of times they start in the brainstem where you have nuclei that are related to sleep. And so it's the pathology that's causing the sleep problems rather than a person having a sleep problem that later causes the Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. So if someone has had a sleep disorder, someone that gets sleep apnea or another sleep disorder in their 30s or early 40s, I would say it's not related at all to getting dementia or Parkinson's, but it's when people get them later in life and then they start getting other symptoms as well, that it might be related to a brain disorder.
That's really interesting. I mean, that's a tricky thing, I'm sure,
Very tricky.
statistically,
Yes.
to parse, right? Just to see cause and effect there. Yeah, that's tough. I have to say the setup of your experiment with the contrast to the plates is fascinating, and it's one of those things too where you can imagine there's all kinds of other things that could affect how much someone eats, which you went through really kind of carefully and
Right.
described. So I always love hearing just the approach and how you control for those different things. Is there, in terms of that research, in terms of the contrast research, is there something you're working on now, or that you've worked on recently, to kind of learn more about that effect? I'm really curious about this because it's such a, like you said, it's almost like a tool that you can use, right? Where
It is, yeah.
sometimes you take advantage of it and things. So
one thing we did, so we didn't, there weren't more studies that followed that one specifically with contrast and Alzheimer's patients in terms of that kind of setting.
right.
But we worked with a number of Boston-based architects who were designing, Alzheimer's disease patient centers. And we helped them design, the hallways and the rooms based on contrast so that the person and the patients could easily find their way around. So we helped with that to help them build the facility using that type of research.
That's great. As somebody whose research is generally just read and not actually applied anywhere, it's really nice to hear somebody actually took the results and used them.
Oh, yeah.
It's interesting. So in the group that I work in, we work in banking. One of the projects that we're kind of scoping out is trying to understand how banks, and then this extends into other businesses, it's kind of a Deloitte-wide initiative, but trying to understand how to design spaces for kind of the vast variety of different either disabilities or diseases that people have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and how you kind of balance those things. And so something like contrast, I don't know that that's come up yet as one of the things that needs to be considered. And maybe it's because either people aren't aware or it's not seen as like necessary, because you could imagine whatever public space you're in, you could use that contrast to direct people the way you want to direct them.
Oh, you could.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So that
you do get some contrast deficits as you age.
Right. So
well.
It might be helpful anyway, just
it
even
would
outside
be.
of Alzheimer's. Yeah.
Exactly.
So we have a couple more questions. I just want to get to these real quick, and then we'll let you go. I know we're over time already, so I appreciate you
Sure.
sticking around. So I'll ask both of them and let you take them in turn. So does having a parent with Alzheimer's and another with Parkinson's disease double your chances, or is it not linear like that? And then the other one is, can the general population get a genetic test to see if they have genes for either late or onset dementia or Alzheimer's?
Oh, okay. So it is not linear like that. in fact, we know that, you know, we're still studying the genes that relate to Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease and so forth. And you could have the gene, but never ever get the disorder. What we know is that it takes both the gene and an environmental trigger to get dementia or to get Alzheimer's or to get Parkinson's disease. So in the case of Alzheimer's, typically what happens is that, you know, maybe you have the genes that are associated with Alzheimer's, and maybe you go through your life and that environmental trigger never happens. You won't get Alzheimer's disease. But let's say it does. And environmental triggers can be the death of a loved one, could be a very stressful situation. Maybe you lose your job. Maybe, you know, you've had some serious head injuries, because that is also a risk factor for developing dementia. And so that might trigger the gene, and then you might get dementia. But it's really uncertain, you know, that there's not a real strong genetic link there. But we know if you have the genes, that it takes more to trigger them. So that's the answer to that question. In terms of getting tested, so the problem is that even if they found that you had a gene, it doesn't mean that you're going to get the disorder. I remember back when I first moved here to Massachusetts, this was, God, when was this? 1995. I moved here, and at the time they were talking about chromosome number 19 being related to late onset Alzheimer's disease. And there were different variants they were looking for on this chromosome. And they said if you had a particular variant, you know, it increased your risk. So they were talking about coming out and you go to your primary care, you get a blood test, and the doctor could tell you what variants you had. And so that was on the news and people were talking about it. And then all of a sudden it was like, nope, we're not doing it, because what ended up happening is they found a bunch of people who had the variant, and those people never got Alzheimer's disease. And then there were other people who didn't have the variant and they did get Alzheimer's disease. So they were like, this is like lawsuits waiting to happen, you know, so we're not touching that. So it really wouldn't be, it's not a real strong genetic basis for it. Not like Huntington's disease is. Yeah, you have the gene, you're going to get Huntington's disease. And so, yeah, I could see in that case being tested, but for Alzheimer's, there's not really a strong link there.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's you know, I guess why there needs to be a lot more research done, right? And obviously there's been a ton of progress even just over the last, you know, handful of years. So
absolutely,
yeah, it's encouraging, but you know, hopefully as we go, we can find a cure and some better testing and things like that. So thank you so much. Like I said, this was incredibly informative. I've learned pretty much everything I know about Alzheimer's today. So that tells you something. So thank you much.
Sure.
Much
no, I appreciate being here.
And with that, I will hand it back over to Alexis.
Okay.
What a great presentation. Actually, you know, to share a little bit about myself, actually, my mother-in-law has dementia. Honestly, listening to this, I would classify it as Alzheimer's, I think. You know, they always call it dementia though when we talk to the doctors. And you know, she went from being an extremely docile woman to being like angry, like she like swears and fights and, you know, does all that kind of stuff. So, you know, a lot of the stuff was really interesting, and a lot of the stuff, I kind of wish I had heard this before, because a lot of the tips, you know, that you had, she was a runner, like she would like leave the house and stuff like that.
Wow.
So, you know, so there's a lot of tips that I think could really help people. So I just thought it was very, very interesting. And I thank you so much for presenting this to us and to our alumni base today. It was great, Sandy. So thank you so much.
Sure.
And,
thank you.
And thanks to Rob, as always. He does a great job facilitating our questions and being a part of this Aluminar. I could not do it without him. And for all of you, this is our last Aluminar of the season right now. We will take a break for the summer, And we will be back in the fall for our next Aluminar, and you can follow us on bridgew.edu/alumni for more information and the fall schedule once we have it. But we will come back in the fall. And I always have to throw in a shameless plug for homecoming. So please save the date for homecoming. We think it's going to be a big one this year. We have a lot of great things going on. If you're in a class that ends, I think we have the 2s and 7s this year. So if you're in a class that ends with 2 or 7, you have a reunion going on. So please keep September 30th and October 1st on your calendar and come back and join us for some great in-person events. And as always, if you have any suggestions for future Aluminar topics, if there's something that you want to see, or you know someone that would be a great presenter, any feedback you want to share regarding the Aluminar series, feel free to email us at alumni@bridgew.edu. And on behalf of the entire alumni office, I thank you for spending your sunny Wednesday afternoon with us. And I wish you all continued health and happiness and a wonderful summer.